Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, it was the 1990s, Dell was focused heavily on corporate business, Gateway ruled the consumer PC market, and there was a sense of emerging competition in the air. This culminated in the release of the first XPS or Extreme Performance System in October 93. The XPS lineup would go on to do very well, making waves among other competitively priced PCs of yesteryear. Machines that now retail for a mere fraction of their original price on eBay. One such example is this, the 630i, a computer that could be configured to cost way over $1,000 10 years ago, and in my opinion one of the best looking systems Dell has ever made. Welcome to another episode of What's Inside, the series where we buy aging or cheap pre-builts online with the intention of opening them up and seeing what lies within, before testing how the often dust-clogged components keep up in today's world of gaming. So, the 2008 630i was named as such to let consumers know it featured an Intel chipset. You know, I for Intel. Kind of pointless when you realise that there were no AMD variants available. It's always interesting picking up what was once a fully customisable PC from factory, because unless explicitly stated you can't be too sure of what components you're going to find inside. I love the screwless design of these old things, allowing for easy access and upkeep of the machine. Inside we have a primarily black and grey theme to match the outside, along with further XPS styling. Powering this behemoth is a 750 watt Dell H750E01 PSU with plenty of connectors allowing for storage upgrades and of course a GPU upgrade, something many XPS 630i owners may have already considered by now. So what's this one powering? Well, first up, let's get the boring bits out the way. For storage, there's a Western Digital Blue 500GB SATA HDD, which, might I add, has recently been inspected and erased by Dan Club. Whoever you are, and wherever you may be, thank you. This was plenty of storage back in the day, but with some games topping out at over 100GB now, you may find your free space quickly disappearing. Next up, let's take a look at this rather unexciting looking graphics card. It appears to be some sort of Dell OEM part, and even trying to find a matching one on Google Images proved to be quite difficult. If you're ever in doubt, 95% of the time the model number will be right on the back, so this mystery card didn't remain a mystery for long. This is the 1GB 4850 from AMD. This GPU launched in June of 2008 at around $200 US, $100 cheaper than the faster 4870. Earlier versions of the 4850 had 512 megabytes of VRAM, so this may have been a little more money. Considering the machine that it's inside, it's likely it had an extra premium slapped on top too. Removing the card reveals more of the 650i chipset's Socket 775 motherboard. The XPS 630 could also be configured with both Crossfire and SLI options, a more popular practice then with high-end builders than it is now. For the RAM we have 4GB of Crucial Ballistics Sport 800MHz DDR2 in dual channel, a fine choice a decade ago, but one that may see you run into a few problems today. Not because of the speed, but because most system builders would suggest at least 8GB of memory. In fact, 16GB is often the recommended sweet spot. I like the ballistics RAM. I think the simple black heat spreader makes it look smarter without going over the top, though it's still an improvement over two plain green modules. Last but not least, let's talk about the processor. What immediately struck me as odd, despite turning out to be a misconception, was the apparent passive cooler with no rear exhaust fan behind it. I just had to remove this bulky looking thing for a better look. It turns out that the fan sits in the middle here. A cool looking design, but one that may initially take you by surprise as you remove the side panel to see what looks like one big solid metal block. I still think there should be an exhaust fan to help disperse heat, as the enclosure is bound to get warm with all these older, hotter components inside. Still, these two large front intake fans should help. The screw jam down the front certainly won't though. Good job I spotted that. While I'm around the front, I'd like to point out the LED lighting array. that faces down and casts a pale blue hue over the front bezel. To finalise, let's talk about the processor. It's a 95-watt Yorkfield Q9450 clocked at 2.66 GHz. It's not up to much these days, but should still give a weaker AMD FX chip a good run for its money according to this Cinebench R15 result. Don't forget that overclocking, in both cases, is also a possibility. Honestly, I think that any difference between most Core 2 quads is far more negligible these days than it used to be, as most of them will struggle in the newest games. I'm not sure if the Core 2 Extremes can be spoken of the same way yet, but that's something I'll have to look into. At £80 total or $100, you may think I overpaid for this combination of specs, but because it's an XPS, they still hold their value quite well. Just like older Alienwares, the name and design still counts for quite a bit, and I don't think I'd have any trouble selling this on for the same amount or even a little bit more. But what can it do when it comes to gaming? Well, with the HD 4850 offering at best DX10 support, and a lack of driver support for Windows 10, which seemed to be pre-installed anyway, after I first presumed that the hard drive was cleared, thanks to Dan, it was time to revisit Windows 7. I did manage to get the 4850 drivers working for a bit by running them in compatibility mode under Windows 10, but after a restart the system stopped recognising any input devices. Weird, huh? I recorded things 2008 style to complement the machine. It totally had nothing to do with my capture card not enjoying this GPU's company one bit. So let's first kick things off with Crysis 2. The successor to the original PC Melter, Crysis 2 is far easier to run. Maybe because it also came out on the PS3 and Xbox 360. It still looks very good, but it's not quite up to the original standard. Still, we were able to play the game at 1080p with at least 30 frames per second. In order to get 1920 by 1080 resolution in the first place, I had to create a custom resolution in the registry editor, because the 4850 doesn't seem to support it natively through the DVI port. Turning things down to 900 or 720p would be better, but I was honestly surprised that we were seeing a near solid 30 FPS with this old hardware. With that, it was on to the next game. Time for good old Modern Warfare 2. I fired up a free-for-all game, got absolutely destroyed, but managed to retain 60 FPS with the extra settings at 1080p. This came out in 2009, I believe, so it may have been just the thing any 630i owners may have been playing. Comfortably, might I add, with their $1,000 computers. I can't believe Modern Warfare 2 still has active lobbies. Actually, yeah, I can. It's probably one of the last great COD games. Counter-Strike Global Offensive also gave us an okay experience. It's a fairly lightweight esports title, but you may notice a few frame dips here and there, particularly when the enemies wipe you out. Maybe that won't happen if you're a better player. But yeah, CSGO runs at 1080p fairly well with everything on low or very low. These are the settings I always tend to use, considering this is an online first-person shooter where every frame counts. Now Metro Last Light Redux ran perfectly as well. The game said it was running at 1080p, but it looks quite blurry. I think I must have set a custom resolution somewhere down the line in the past, in the INI files or something, as it looked very much like 720p. I'll have to investigate this a little more. Anyway, take this result with a pinch of salt, but not too much, because this should still be more than playable on a similar setup. Don't bother trying the new Metro Exodus though, as not only will it not run in the first place, but even if it did, it would probably melt every component inside this case. Finally, it's Grand Theft Auto 5. Every resolution yielded similar results, whether it be 720, 900 or 1080p, so I'm going to have to say this is unplayable. I think this is likely due to the 4 gigs of RAM. It's an easily remedied situation, so bear that in mind if you're having trouble with this game on a similar setup. 8 gigs may have helped some of the stutter in CSGO as well. But there we have it. This is the Dell XPS 630i, a system just over a decade old and one that still leaves a pretty good visual impression. I think these old PCs look absolutely fantastic, and whilst they aren't really up to performing too well with modern titles, they are still okay for general browsing purposes, and if you can find one cheap enough and that's all you need to do with it, well, then maybe it's worth picking one up, as let's not forget it could also be upgraded and turned into the ultimate old school gaming rig. With all that said and done though, all that's left to do is to thank you for watching. Please leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you own or have ever owned one of these XPS systems and what you think about it in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.